Chapter 8. Continued. "What are you doing?" Karen asked. "Packing," Joseph answered. But he knew even then that he would not leave. He had never been able to leave Pyotr or Bant willingly. He would not be able to leave Karen either. I am not in control of myself, Joseph realized. I gave myself to her, and I can't just decide to take myself back. Why? Karen asked, already hurt because she could not comprehend what he was doing. If I stay, I'll destroy her as I destroyed Pyotr. We'll still be friends, Joseph answered. What brought this on? Why now, at 3 o'clock in the morning? What did I do? Ansett, Joseph said. She misunderstood. How can you possibly be jealous of him? He's only 15. They give them drugs in the songhouse. He's sterile. Puberty is put off for years. He hardly even has a sex, Joseph. I'm not jealous of him, Joseph answered. She stood regarding him for a while, and then realized what he meant. Still the old 62%, is it? She asked. No, he answered. I just see the potential. I want to avoid it. There is no potential, she said. You don't understand. Damn right I don't. You mean that all this time I've just been filling your bed until you could find a beautiful boy to fill it? Maybe postponing it would have been better, Joseph thought. Postponing is definitely better. I can't do this tonight. Because Ansett is only potential, and Karen is real. Karen I love now, and I can't bear the hurt and anger in her voice. No, he said softly, fervently. Karen, you don't understand. I didn't choose you. I didn't choose Bant. Things like this happen. They just happen, and I don't have any control over it. You mean that in just one evening you suddenly forget that you love me? No! He cried out in agony. No, Karen, I just know that it's possible. It's possible, and I don't want it to happen. Don't you see? I don't, she said. If you love me, you love me. Joseph got up, walked to her, knocking over the duffel in the process. Karen, I don't want to leave you. Then don't. It's because I love you that I want to leave. If you love me, you'll stay, she said. He had known it from the moment she appeared in the door. He couldn't leave her. When the change came, it would come, and then it would be irreversible. And then he would leave because he loved someone else, and there was something in him that made it impossible for him to love 2 people at once. But now the one person was Karen, and he could not leave her because she wanted him to stay. I'll hurt you, he said. You could not hurt me worse than leaving me now, for no reason. He wondered if she was right, or if it was easier for no reason than for the reason that there would be in the future. Surely it was. Surely it was easier to bear if you didn't have to know who it was who took your lover's heart from you. But maybe not. She was a woman, and Joseph did not understand women. Maybe she was right, and it would be better this way. Besides, Joseph, what makes you think Ansett would ever have you? He didn't have 2 emperors, you know. She was right. She was right, and he knew it, and he went to the duffel and unpacked it and put the clothing away. He never will, Joseph said. I was a fool. I'm just tired. And he undressed and got into the bed. They made love in silence, and several times Karen seemed surprised by the force of his passion tonight. She did not realize that, in spite of his best efforts, he kept seeing the curls clinging to Ansett's neck, the soft cheek that he had not touched except in his mind, but that was all the softer because of that. He tried to take Ansett's face out of his mind, and failed. Karen sighed contentedly afterward, and kissed him. She thinks it's all better now, Joseph thought bitterly. She thinks she's kept me. She would have kept me if she had let me go now. And when her breathing became heavy and regular, he leaned up on his arm and looked at her face, which she always turned away from him in sleep. He stroked her cheek softly. Her mouth moved, almost like the sucking instinct of a baby. I warned you, he said softly, so softly that perhaps the words did not find even a voice. I warned you. Then he gave up and lay back and tried to sleep, sour at heart because he had tried to control his life just once and could not do it after all. Karen was not asleep, however, or she had been wakened by his touch. Joseph, she said, I'm going to have your baby. No, he said softly. Please, she said, And because he was tired and not disposed to deny her anything, and because he knew that soon enough he would deny her everything, he let himself cool, and they made love again. And sometime in the next week she conceived, and when Joseph saw how happy it made her, and how concerned for her it made him, he began to think that maybe he had been wrong, that maybe Ansett would mean nothing to him. For the child's sake, and because he wanted to bind himself to Kjaran even tighter, Joseph insisted, and they married. Now I will never let go of you in my heart, Joseph thought. I will love you forever, he thought. I am lying, he thought. And this time, he was right. Chapter 9. The tour was Ansett's idea. Richter's had just returned from his tour of the prefects, and the results had been splendid. Well, why not me? Ansett asked. And the more he talked about it, the better his advisors liked it. There are always differences from region to region on a planet, Ansett said, and most planets develop dialects, some even languages. But Earth has nations. If it makes sense for the Emperor to have contact with every prefect, it makes sense for the manager of Earth to have contact with every nation. To Kjaran he also explained. The statistics and figures you and the others play with all the time, they mean nothing to me. I can't think that way. You tell me what you've concluded, and I don't understand why. But when I meet them, when I hear them speak, when I hear the songs of the people and their leaders, I'll be able to understand better. Better? Than I do now. And in some ways better than you understand them. For all that, the computers even keep track of the number of old fleskets returned to the pots for scrap. So they took the tour, and Ansett brought all his top advisors with him, and allowed them to bring their spouses, those who had contracts. That was why Joseph came along, though he was not an advisor to the manager. The tour began in the Americas, with visits to Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, Titicaca, Panama, Mexico, West America, East America, and Quebec. In Mexico, Joseph and Kjaran stayed 3 days, visiting the places and redoing the things seen and done when they first loved each other. They had their son with them, of course, little Ephraim. Joseph chose the name because an earlier Joseph, thousands of years before, had given his favorite son that name. History, Kjaran had snorted. A ridiculous name. She actually liked it quite a bit. Ephraim was only a year old, but thought of himself as an accomplished athlete. He was unusually well coordinated for his age, but not so adroit as he thought, and he broke his arm in a fall from a ledge in the ruins of the Olympic Stadium. Ephraim is doing fine, Kjaran complained. It's you that's driving me out of my mind, Joseph. I get worried. You get worried obnoxiously, Kjaran said. It just takes 2 weeks rest and then he's fine. I'm taking care of him. You're just making him nervous. I can't stand sitting around doing nothing, Joseph said. And so they decided that Joseph should rejoin the manager's tour in Quebec, and they would meet again when Ephraim was well, in Europe. Shouldn't you go and I stay? After all, you're the personal advisor. I'm just a spouse. He doesn't need me with him, and Ephraim doesn't need you with him. Just see the sights and study the history, and let Ephraim keep busy healing, instead of trying to constantly entertain his father. He had the hiccoughs for half an hour yesterday, you got him laughing so hard. I'm going, then, if you want to be rid of me. She kissed him. Get out of here, she said. He got out, sorry in a way to be leaving her, but delighted not to be missing the weeks in old Europe, which, more than any other region, had preserved the ancient nations intact. Ansett noticed him almost as soon as he returned. Back with us already? Kjaran's staying with the baby. She kicked me out. I was impossible. I hope the boy heals fast. And then, busy again, meeting with the self-styled King of Quebec, a title only barely tolerated by the Emperor because the kings of Quebec were properly subservient and remarkably hated by their people. No danger of rebellion, and therefore not a problem needing to be corrected. Over the next several days, however, Ansett and Joseph were thrown together more and more. Ansett thought at first that the meetings were accidental. Then he realized that he himself was setting them up, deliberately going to places where he knew Joseph would be. He and Joseph had had little contact over the months. While Ansett knew from his voice that Joseph didn't dislike him, Joseph still avoided him, rarely staying in a conversation very long, leaving Ansett always alone with Kjaran. Joseph's shyness needed no explanation to Ansett. He respected it. But now his closest confidant and friend, Kjaran, was gone, and he needed to talk to someone, so he didn't stop himself from meeting with Joseph. In fact, he began to make it more obvious. He invited him to meals, asked him along on walking tours, talked to him at night. Ansett couldn't understand why Joseph always seemed reluctant to accept, yet never refused an invitation. And gradually, over the days, through Paris, Vienna, Berlin, Stratford, Bealotha, Cleath, with rain always making the air deliciously cool and comfortably dim, Joseph lost his reticence, and Ansett began to understand why Kjaran was so devoted to him. Ansett also began to notice that Joseph was sexually attracted to him. Hundreds of men and women had been before. Ansett was used to it, had to put up with it through all his years in the palace. Joseph was different, though. His desire seemed not so much lust as affection, part of his friendship. It intrigued Ansett, where years before such things had repelled him. He was curious. He had grown 17 centimeters since his appointment to Babylon, and his voice was deepening all the time. There were other changes, and he found himself with longings he did not know how to satisfy, with questions he did not dare to ask only because he already knew the spoken answer, and the other answer he was afraid of. At the songhouse, little was said of the drugs that singers and songbirds were given, just that they put off puberty, and that there were side effects. There were also whispers that it was worse for men than for women, but how it was worse, or even how it was bad, was never said. The drugs gave them 5 more years as children, 5 more years with the beautiful voices of childhood. Well, Ansett had lost his songs and so didn't need his voice, except for the coarse singing involved in making every national leader completely devoted to him, easy tricks that he was ashamed of even as he used them. His 5 extra years of childhood were over, and he wanted to know what happened next. After the meeting with the Welsh chief, who affected coarse manners but whose Gaelic was beautiful to Ansett, the planet manager and the assistant minister of colonization went to Caernarvon Castle together. It had been domed thousands of years before, the last castle of Britain to survive with some of the original stones in place. They walked together on the walls, overlooking the dense green of the grass and the trees, and the blue of the water that spread between the castle and the island of Anglesey. The only sign of modern life was the Flesket and the guards beside it, and the trail where the grass grew lower because of the vehicles that passed over it. There were others in the castle, of course. It was maintained as a luxury hotel, and they would spend the night there. Security guards were going through the place on a final check, but where Ansett and Joseph stood there was no one. Birds skimmed back and forth over the sea. "What is this place?" Ansett asked. "Why is it kept like this?" "A castle was like a battleship," Joseph answered. "All the men would come in when their enemies attacked, and the walls kept them out." "This was before lasers, then?" "And before bombs and artillery. Just bows and arrows, spears, and a few more choice things. They used to pour boiling oil over the walls to kill men trying to climb them." Ansett looked down, hiding his revulsion easily, curious to see how far the drop was to the ground. "It seems dangerous enough just to stand up here." "They lived in violent times." Ansett thought of his own violent times. "We all do," he said. "Not like them. If you had a sword, you had power. You ruled over everyone weaker than you. They were always at war, always trying to kill each other, fighting over land." "Mikhail ended wars," Ansett said. Joseph laughed. "Yes, by winning all of them. It's probably the only way ever to have peace. Other ways have been tried. They never worked." Better, Joseph thought. Postponing is definitely better. I can't do this tonight. Because Ansett is only potential, and Kjaran is real. Kjaran I love now, and I can't bear the hurt and anger in her voice. "No," he said softly, fervently. "Kjaran, you don't understand. I didn't choose you. I didn't choose Bant. Things like this happen. They just happen," and regarding him for a while, and then realized what he meant. "Still the old 62%, is it?" she asked. "No," he answered. "I just see the potential. I want to avoid it." "There is no potential," she said. "You don't understand." "Damn right I don't! You mean that all this time I've just been filling your bed until you could find a beautiful boy to fill it?" Maybe postponing it would have been Chapter 8, continued. "What are you doing?" Kieran asked. Packing, Joseph answered. But he knew even then that he would not leave. Joseph answered. What brought this on? Why now, at 3 o'clock in the morning? What did I do? Ansett, Joseph said. She misunderstood. How can you possibly be jealous of him? He's only 15. They give them drugs in the songhouse. He's sterile. Puberty is put off for years. He hardly even has a sex, Joseph. I'm not jealous of him, Joseph answered. She stood. He'd never been able to leave Pyotr or Bant willingly. He would not be able to leave Kieran either. I am not in control of myself, Joseph realized. I gave myself to her, and I can't just decide to take myself back. Why? Kieran asked, already hurt because she could not comprehend what he was doing. If I stay, I'll destroy her as I destroyed Pyotr. We'll still be friends,